Alright, so this is going to be another movie review. This one's called A Woman Called Golda, 1982. This is going to be another made-for-TV movie. Starring Ingrid Bergman as Golda Meir, the woman prime minister of Israel during the early 70s. I'm giving this 2 out of 5 stars. I thought it was way overrated. And in the ending credits when it's recommended by the National Endowment for the Arts, NEA, it's going to be a bad film. Basically, it tries to portray a hideous politician creature as a good person. And I'll tell you why it's wrong. As the writer of Dune once opined, only corrupt people are attracted to government like a magnet. So regardless of whether she was considered a statesperson, I'm not holding her in high esteem after watching her. Honestly, I knew nothing about her, or the history of Israel for that matter, until I watched the movie. And I suppose that's the only benefit of watching this, is that you get a really quick pro-Israel perspective of the history of Israel from 1948 through 1978. So roughly 30 years of Israeli history in this one. And starts out with Golda Meir. She's flirting with this Leonard Nimoy character, her future husband, and he convinces her to live on a kibbutz, which is like a hippie commune. I don't know why anybody would want to live on a kibbutz, but I guess marrying Golda Meir is reason enough for Leonard Nimoy to join her. He gets sick with malaria, and he tells her he's leaving the kibbutz. She reluctantly agrees to leave with him. They go to Jerusalem, and he becomes a bookkeeper. They're so poor with 2 children on his meager bookkeeper income that she separates from him. And this entire story is being told in 1977 at some Milwaukee high school. She grew up in the United States after escaping Russian persecution of Jewish people, I guess before the Bolshevik Revolution, somewhere around there, during the Tsar Nicholas Tsar period. And so she comes back to this Milwaukee school to tell her life story, essentially. She's telling it while the events unfold on the screen. And the situation between her and her husband kind of reminded me of my own family. My mom had separated from my stepdad, but they had remained married, which I wish my second wife would have done in hindsight for the benefit of my son. But ironically, my son has turned out pretty good at age 9 so far. He hasn't been a bad kid by any means, which is the norm for divorced kids, I guess. So he's a little unusual, thank God. But anyways, the marital squabbles kind of reminded me of my own marriage and also my mother's marriage. So, getting back to the movie, Golda Meir meets her kibbutz friend, some dude who's got the hots for her, and he helped her get rise to labor position in the kibbutz or something, some kind of political labor kibbutz position. I'm not sure, but when she was in the kibbutz, she managed to make a profit for the poultry. Don't ask me how she did that. There are a lot of plot holes. For instance, how did she convince her husband to go to the kibbutz? I just speculated there. I never was really explained to me, so I just guessed. And also, how did she manage to make a profit in a kibbutz with a bunch of poultry? That part wasn't explained either. But she after her incident in Jerusalem, her old kibbutz friend, the guy who has the hots for her, he gets her a job in Tel Aviv. That's when she and her husband separate, because she considers career more important than family. Quite literally, she ignores her kids, just like my second wife does. And the ironic thing is that she has most of the timeshare with my son. So it's a little screwy, the child custody situation in the United States, and the timeshare shenanigans in the courtroom. But I won't go on about that. I think I've said enough. So she gets a labor minister, and she starts messing around in Africa, of all places. She even starts doing business with Idi Amin, the butcher of Uganda. I remember him in grade school. He was notorious for being a cannibal. And creepy guy, Idi Amin. There's a telling point in the movie where she says, "I'd do business with the devil himself if it meant saving Israel." So essentially what she's doing is denying morality. In other words, the ends always justify the means. And I'm by no means for or against Israel. I think the ending was pretty good because it showed the Egyptian-Israeli peace accord from 1978. I'll talk about that later. That was only high point of the film, actually, was the ending. Because the film just shows various wars that happened. Never any wars between the Arabs and the Israelis. And it gets to the point where the Syrians, I think, are about to invade the Golan Heights area, and Israel is about ready to get wiped off the face of the earth. But before that, she becomes foreign minister and then prime minister. And then right when Israel is about ready to get wiped off the map by Egypt and Syria, she starts begging Ned Beatty for all this military hardware stuff. And Ned Beatty plays a senator, same as the sniper movie that I just saw. He also played a senator. So kind of interesting. I saw 2 movies where Ned Beatty played a U.S. senator. I didn't think I was going to see that in my lifetime, but I did. And Golda Meir is faced with this dire situation where Israel is about ready to get obliterated. And of all people, the self-described anti-Semite, President Richard Nixon, decides to give them all the weapons that they can handle, and then some, through the airlift. And he had to go through his cabinet was actually opposed to it. They didn't go into any of the detail. Number one, that he was an anti-Semite. Number two, that he changed his position on the Jewish people of Israel just so that he could get more votes, presumably, in some future election before he resigned. And he had to go through his cabinet who were opposed to the airlift. He had to go over them to get the weapons quickly to Israel because they were all opposed to it. They didn't want to tick off the USSR, who was supplying weapons to the Syrians and the Egyptians. So they didn't go into detail about the first and third points that I made about the anti-Semitism and the opposition from his own cabinet, but that's a great story. They should have gone into more detail, in my opinion, but they didn't. They just said Nixon was this great U.S. president who helped Israel. They didn't say that he was an anti-Semite or that he, by his own admission on his tape, or that his cabinet was opposed to it, which would have made it more intriguing for me. I had to do a little research on my own to figure that out. But would you buy a used car from Tricky Dick? I wouldn't. He's another sly character, especially when it comes to foreign policy, apparently, and also monetary policy. So Israel's saved. 4 years later, Anwar Sadat of Egypt has a change of heart. He decides to compromise, open up the Suez Canal to traffic and give up some of the territory that he had been demanding from Israel. I think the whole mess started when the UN just decided that Jews everywhere could have this land for themselves because they were God's chosen people, and they just drew up arbitrary boundaries, which of course the Arabs never really cared for. I sort of have mixed feelings about the whole situation in Palestine right now, where Golda Meir was living in her kibbutz. She was getting attacked by Arabs while she was living in a kibbutz, and this was back in the 40s, I guess. So I think if the PLO or Muslim Brotherhood or Hamas or whoever's running the Palestinian side over there just took total control of the government, they probably do the same as if not worse job than the Israelis. So I don't really take sides in that conflict. And I think the United States is the same way. They just throw money at both sides, which is kind of dumb. But I'm not really pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian. I'm just I like the way that Anwar Sadat kind of compromised, and that was the one point that I like about this movie, the ending, where Sadat is promoting peace instead of war after decades and decades of fighting with Israel. So that was kind of an uplifting ending there after rather depressing display of corruption on the part of Golda Meir, giving up her family for and her Jewish culture for some political power, essentially. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, especially when I heard her mention Idi Amin. That kind of gave me the creeps. But anyways, not a very thorough but interesting history of Israel for 30 years. Of course, Golda Meir was a member of the Labour Party, which kind of explained her ridiculous Africa adventures. And she chain smokes a lot in this one. I remember telling my mother how terrible a president Jimmy Carter was back in the late 70s. And her retort was, well, he brokered the Israeli-Egyptian peace accords, which kind of made sense to me. I didn't really have a rebuttal for that. I mean, that was probably Jimmy Carter's best achievement while he was president, come to think of it. And, Golda Meir is kind of similar, I guess. She didn't really have any good qualities until the peace accords, and at that time she was a private citizen. So she talks a lot about peace, but then she goes to war. So she's kind of contradicting herself there. I can understand pointing the finger at the Arabs when they're attacking you, but it's a little bit self-contradictory there to me. Anyways, I don't really take sides either way. Well, I'm definitely not pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian. I'm anti-government all the way around. Doesn't matter which one. I don't think one could do a better job than the other, necessarily. So that's my opinion. Sorry if I offended any Jews in this video. I try to be neutral, but here in the United States, if you're not pro-Israel, you're considered an anti-Semite, like Richard Nixon was, but he admitted that he was on tape, so it's a little different in my view. Anyways, that's the end of my review. Laters.